Actually, I got to this point where I was like, oh man, what'd be cool and should work is you could have something that wrapped, but you could also say like every time it wrapped, it shifted one.
To start things off, why don't you give us the convention pitch for INVERSUS, which I'm sure you've
Sure.
given many, many times, but for
Yeah,
the
it
benefit
tends
of
to
those who.
change. So yeah, it's Inversus is a negative space shooter. So basically, you're either on the white side or the black side, and if you're on the white side, you can only move on the white tiles. The black tiles are collisions. You just like slam into them, right? The black
Hmm.
side's the opposite. You slam into the white tiles like they're a wall. And when you shoot, you flip the color, opening up where you can go. But because you're in these negative spaces, if I shoot and open up a path for me, I create a wall for you, right?
Hmm.
So the level is constantly shifting with every attack. So like the game starts simple and it's like here's this really simple board that you're on, but a few seconds in, just based on my actions, your reactions, my decisions, your plans, we end up in this like new space we've never played in before.
Yeah, it was really cool seeing this for the first time because, like you said, it kind of starts simple, but it escalates really quickly into something much more complex. And one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you about is that choice to go minimalistically in the art style and just have everything be positive and negative space. Did Obviously that's a key feature of Inversus, but did it have any unforeseen challenges that you didn't expect
Yeah,
in
I mean, there's right like there's a lot going on mechanically complex in the game, and I wanted the it to read easy so you can understand what's happening. It's like, which is why the board's simple, the squares are simple, the but the like actual strategy is really complex. And because I wanted to keep it so simple aesthetically, to make it read really easy and read very affordantly, like you can look at it and you can go, oh, I get what's going on,
hmm
right? Um, because it's not a thing that happens in the real world. Like there's no like I exist in one space and you exist in the other
right?
that you can just like have like an analog and put it in there. So actually having it kind of look board gamey like that works, but it means that as you want to add more subtle details or features to the game, the vocabulary you have to like communicate visually is limited, and it's very easy to get something that no longer fits or breaks out of that. And there's a lot of like, how do we communicate this mechanic and do it in a way that aesthetically gels with the simplicity of everything, right? And doesn't
hmm
sort of stick out.
Yeah. The other thing that really surprised me when I saw this at PAX is I think alone, just having a big space where this was the mechanic, one white, one black, and you're shooting these contrasting colors that are making positive and negative spaces, alone would have been cool, but everything's borderless.
Yeah.
So everything kind of bleeds over and it's very geometric, and you can be going up and suddenly you're coming up from the bottom, catch somebody unaware. That's how you really get ahead. Um, the thing I was really wondering out from a design perspective was how do you go about making these levels? Because I'm sure that's a level of design that's kind of different from just setting up a regular area that or space that you say, okay, well, let's throw two people in here and they can battle it out. So one, how did you come up with this idea to have everything be kind of borderless and endless? And how do you go about implementing that and designing that?
Sure. Yeah. So before I made Inverses, the idea for it originally came from this little competitive, like multiplayer game jam thing, and it wasn't made there, but I made a little prototype there with a friend of a game where you were like these ships, and there was like as you moved, it created this like flow of like if someone else moved in your trail, they would get pulled in, like it was almost like a drift force, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that, it was constrained into this rectangle, but the whole time was like, this would be really cool if it kept looping, right? Because then you'd have these like streams and this like really interesting like fluid like paths going through, wrapping around the screen, and it'd be like trippy to see bullets fall and
Yeah.
stuff. But at the time, we were using just like there's like this 2D physics engine. It's called Box 2D. It's in a bunch of stuff, and using physics engine for that, like a physics engine is built to simulate reality, right? And reality doesn't loop around like
Right.
that. So a lot of times when games will do stuff like that, what they'll do is, you go off one side of the screen, it deletes you, spawns you on the other side of the screen, and you come back in.
Right.
Or they'll try to like keep two of you, but it's not ever quite right, and it's like it's never truly like simulated seamlessly. Um, and it was a little game jam. I was like, okay, well, we don't have time to.
Right.
We're just gonna whatever. But I liked that idea of like this seamless loop and just making that correct. And then I thought, with the INVERSUS stuff, it was like, oh, that would be interesting to like mix that in here and see what that did. And so because everything's written from scratch, it was like, okay, I can make it so the collision detection, the physics, the motion, the rendering, everything is simulated in this like it's technically like a toroidal shape, it's like a donut, right?
Hmm.
Where it's it wraps in both directions,
Right.
um, and but unwrapped flat on the screen. So I was able to do that, and it was fun. And the designing levels for it is it's interesting because the big part of an INVERSUS level is making something that's strategically interesting, but also when you turn on the screen the first time, it has to be sort of easy to understand. Like, it can't just be like garbage blocks everywhere, right? It has to
Right.
be like clean shapes that you can look at. It's a little aesthetically pleasing, but it's also just like you understand the play space immediately. And once you have stuff wrapping on the other side, the patterns of what's on screen they're not as easy to interpret. And I totally should have started off and made like a little level editor. So as I painted in one spot, you could see it like going in other spots, but I never got around to that. So I just have to see, basically try to project like, oh, what's going to wrap around, or just load it up in game and look. Um, and one of the unexpected challenges there was like making shapes that were like, there's a level in the game that's like a staircase and it just goes diagonally forever. But because it goes up the screen, it'll then come out over here and you see it going up again and
Hmm.
again. Um, and initially it was like, okay, so the left and right side have to match up and the bottom and top have to match up. And there's only, you have to find the right number of tiles and the right cadence of stairs to get this all to just like snap into place. And it just like, then all of a sudden you don't see the single rectangle, you see this diagonal staircase.
Right.
And that was a pain. And
I can imagine that when I was thinking about this, I was
yeah.
like, this has to have been something that was a pain at points.
And it actually, now it would be a lot easier because later in development, Universe has been a slow digest for a long, long time. And eventually I got to this point where I was like, oh man, it'd be cool and should work is you could have something that wrapped, but you could also say like every time it wrapped, it shifted one or shifted five or whatever.
Hmm.
And as long as like there were hallways to link after the shift, it should still be plausible. It means like if you actually looked at the space, there's a couple instances of you, but you're far enough away that all the physics simulation, everything works. And I use that in a couple levels later in the game where it's like you'll go out on the bottom and you'll come out on the top and
Hmm.
stuff, and you'll see it wrap weird where it's like, oh, the bottom right of this level is now on the top left of this screen, and it's like really like your brain's like, oh my god, what's happening? Which is awesome.
Right.
But if I had that tech earlier, it would have made making like levels like the staircase so easy because I could have just like made a thing and then just like, oh, just slide it up one, and then like it'd be great. But yeah, I didn't.
um, so the other big thing, I think the biggest thing with Inversus is these two modes that you're gonna have. You're gonna have an online multiplayer competitive mode, and you're gonna have what I would consider co-op arcade mode. I mean, you can play it single player, but it's gonna be couch co-op. I mean, it's like Geometry Wars, the next generation, if you ask me. Having played a lot of Geometry Wars in my university days. I have been kind of on a kick with asking developers about multiplayer and how things are balanced. And obviously, Inversus doesn't have the issues of lots of different characters with different abilities, but I wonder how you approached those two different modes of competitive versus cooperative, and how you reconciled those and what you had to do to make sure everything worked for both modes. Because the mechanics really are virtually the same between the two. So yeah, that was one thing I was really interested in hearing how you approach that as a developer.
Yeah, I really wanted all the mechanics to like line up. So it's like, oh, I learned how to do this thing in one, it applies to the other, but the framing is so different that they almost feel like two different games, even
Mm,
though they function pretty much the same. And there's there are some slight differences between the two. So um, in the arcade mode, it's like there's a power up in the game, right, where it turns you red and you can just like smash through the blocks,
right.
right? So the enemies that start in arcade mode are just like, oh, here's these guys that just have that power up and they have it forever. So they're just red, they move slowly, but it's the same power up you get in versus mode, and you can read it like, oh, that's a red dude. That means he's on contact, will break a block, so he's not going to shoot at me. He's just slowly progressing and like chunk, 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 taking stuff out. Um, and you get a lot of these guys, and there's the threat there is it's a bit wider than just the guy, right? Because like once they hit a tile and flip it, the tile is going to break, and if you're on that tile, you get hurt.
Right.
And so the distance, the threat distance, is a little wider than you might expect. It's not necessarily when they touch you; it's when they hit a tile that's going to touch you, right?
Right.
So I ended up doing this like in the grid. There's like this red outline glow around those guys to sort of help like show here's this area of threat, fear this redness,
Mm.
and get away. And that's not inverses mode, and it didn't it didn't have a necessity to be there. I tried it there because I was like, oh, I want them to do the same, to read similar. Um, but that's a slight difference between the two. Is in arcade, the guys get a bit of a threat area rendered around them, and then also in arcade, guys drop ammo when you kill them,
Mm.
which is sort of to the game has ammo management, but you don't have in like a dual stick shootery
Yeah.
geometry wars thing, right?
It's not. Yeah, you don't see that.
And so that helps like it helps pull you around the map, which is great because as you get pulled around the map, guys close in the map behind you. It keeps the board shifting.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, there's like some subtle differences like that, but otherwise like they function the same. All the speeds are the same, the bullet counts and all that, and I really like having that. The rule set, one applies to the other, and it's just the framing is very different.
Mm. Cool. So moving away from some of our questions about Inversus and learn a little bit more about you as a developer. First question is, how did you get into independent game development? Where did that? You've been making games outside of independent game development, but what drew you to be independent?
Yeah, I mean, back in college, I got to make smaller games. I was in IGF back in college, and that was a great experience. It's forever ago, like 2004. And I really liked that. I liked the small team thing, making all parts of the game. And I went and did the AAA thing for many years. At points, I did contracting and back up to big AAA. And through that whole time, you're always like playing with little projects and stuff. And it just got to the point where it was like, oh, I want to go make something. And originally, this was supposed to be just a prototype for the engine to like say like, okay, the engine works. Here's a simple game, and now I can make like something bigger. But then it ended up actually being a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be initially. So it was like, wow, like all my friends, everyone's having fun. We're coming over playing this, and then it was like maybe I should actually show this to people outside of like who's allowed in my apartment. And
Cool. So what other games, when you both in AAA and indie development, what other games, one, do you play, and two, have informed the way that you make games?
yeah, I'll play pretty much anything. I don't play sports games much, unless they're like a bit, tweaked. Like I'll play the Mario sports game sometimes. Um, the but yeah, I mean, like everything has influence in some way, right? Like it's hard to definitely, uh, this game like I was saying came out of a game jam that was sort of, one-on-one competitive stuff.
Hmm.
And that was certainly inspired by seeing Towerfall at E3 the first time it ever showed there. And it was just like, oh, here's this really simple thing, simple set of rules. And yeah, it was like one of, if not the first of that like little single screen multiplayer
Mm,
renaissance that sort of kicked off, right?
yeah.
Um, and that was, I loved playing that there. So that certainly has a direct connection to this ever getting made. Because INVERSUS was started in 2013 sometime, like late summer, I think. It's just, it was a long time. It wasn't like a focus. It was just like, oh, here's the thing to make sure everything's working, is the little demo
Right,
game.
right.
And then it just sort of grew, right? So yeah, it's been there a long time. So a lot of like the initial influence was back then, and like the sports friend stuff was kind of influential on it. Just like here's these very minimalist set of mechanics that I thought were really fun.
Cool. So kind of wrapping things up, are there any other indie developers out there currently that you think are doing something really cool from a developer standpoint, that you think people should be checking out if they're not?
And there is a ton of indie stuff that's really cool. Like, I mean, it's hard to like limit that down to a small set, right? Like you walk
Yeah.
around any convention these days, and I swear you're gonna have 10 times more fun in the indie area than any other area. The like even just like you go on Twitter and just like the screens that come up of stuff people's making, like it's that game, is it Megasphere, or there's like that side scroller one that's super like glowy and
Oh,
oh,
I
God,
don't
I
know
wish
if
I
I've
knew
seen
the
that
name of it.
one.
It's this gorgeous game. It's like Mega something. But it's just like here's one dude or a couple dudes just making this thing, and it's just like these images keep coming out. It's like, oh, this is gorgeous. And Manifold Gardens coming out. That looks
Hmm.
really cool. I haven't got to play it. It's a lot of stuff. Like a lot of the yeah, it's crazy how much like inspiring stuff is coming out from all sides, and the competition out there once you ship is high.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched this, like you have more fun in the indie section, which is pretty much why we started doing what we're doing.
Yeah,
Because we found that. I mean, indies are where you get the cool stories, where you get the interesting ideas. And you're right, it is. There's a lot out there now, and it is hard to just pinpoint two or three that are doing something spectacular because there's 12 or 13 that are doing something spectacular, if
yeah.
not more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Um,
gonna once this, the game's just about done now, so I'm
mhm.
hopefully gonna have like time to play games again. I have this big list, but yeah, like Video Ball just came out. I want to grab
Yeah,
that. Um, that's got a lot of similarities to it's like a minimalist
that's true.
competitive thing. They're more sports themed, and this is more arcade game themed. But like, there's a lot of stuff there, so I'm super interested in playing that. And I don't know, like, yeah, there's look anywhere, you will find cool stuff.
Cool. So just to kind of wrap things up, you're launching on August 16th. So just kind of, how does it feel looking back at the whole project and now being at the end? What do you think you would have done differently from the start now that you're at the end?
What would I have done differently from the start? Well, like I was saying before, I probably would have just gone in on making a really simple level editor at the start. That would have made things easier on the way. I think having like the network online multiplayer didn't come in until pretty late.
Hmm.
Um, and had I just like bit that bullet earlier, scheduling would have been a lot better because that was like, all right, I think I'm going to come out. I thought I was originally thinking of coming out in the spring.
Mm.
And then it was like, no, we got to go all in, do matchmaking, online co-op, online four-player, online all this stuff, and it's all there, and it's great, and it's way better now that it's there. But having taken that extra work on up front would have certainly been nice. Although, like, you never know though, right? Like maybe if you did that, then there wouldn't have been so much focus on getting the rest of it really solid before diving in. It's like it's hard to say, right? Like there's so many things where you go like, oh, this could be done better, but in retrospect, would you be at the same spot
It's
had you done
true.
that?
True.
I don't
It's
know.
very true. I've heard the same thing from a couple other developers, but it's a good point. You never know what you wouldn't have done had you
Yeah.
been done that first. It's a good point. Well, Ryan Juckett of Hypersect Games, thank you for taking some time to tell us
Thank
a little
you.
about INVERSUS' history and your time as an indie dev. Um, keep an eye out for INVERSUS coming out on August 16th.
Ready, go.